So let's discuss funding options. You've developed an innovation and perhaps you want to build a business around it. In order to do that, you're going to need to have money in order to hire people, pay for supplies, pay for marketing, whatever it might be. There are two broad ways to get money for your business. One is to make revenue. So you sell your product or service to customers, they pay you, and then you reinvest that money in the business. Or the other option is to get financing. Somebody provides you with money in exchange for some obligations, and you use that money to grow the business. Notice I listed them as options 1 and options A because there is not necessarily one option that's better than the other. How you finance your business or how you get money for your business depends greatly on the type of business you have. Specifically as it relates to technology companies or innovation-based companies, you often see that they have to go out and get financing because building technology is capital intensive. It requires a lot of money up front to get the product developed or the service developed before any revenue can be generated. Perhaps you're doing research on an innovation and you need to pay scientists and researchers for several years before you can actually sell the product, or you need to pay engineers to design and manufacture the product before you can sell it to somebody. You're going to need to be able to pay up for all of this without any revenue for a while, and to do this, you might be able to get outside financing. So again, no option is necessarily better than the other. It just depends on the type of business you're building. Some businesses who have revenue will often take outside financing anyway because it allows them to move faster than if they just depended on the revenue that they were getting for their business. So financing can also be an accelerant. If you do decide that you're going to get financing, there are tons of ways to get money, but there are 3 major categories that you can rely on. The first are loans. So these are loans that you get from a bank or maybe from particular investors. Loans are not too common in the development of innovation-based or technology-based companies. The reason for this is because these companies are very risky and banks are limited in the amount of risk that they can take, and they often simply cannot lend money to these innovation-based companies. So loans are an option for some businesses if you have low risk or if you have collateral that you can put up against the loan. So let's say you have equipment that you can sell in order to pay the loan off. But again, usually for innovation-based companies, that's not really an option. The other option is venture capital. So venture capital was formed specifically as a form of investment to chase after risk. So venture capital is built and designed to finance the types of businesses that are based on innovation and technology. So I'll go more into detail on venture capital. You might also be eligible to apply for grants. Grants are great because they don't come with the same financial obligations that you might have with loans and venture capital, but usually grants are more limited in who they'll fund. Maybe there's a specific objective that the grants are trying to achieve, and not all companies will be eligible to apply for grants. There's also a long review process, and applying for grants can take several months or years, so it's not the fastest form of financing. Again, depending on the type of business you're creating, especially in the innovation-based space, grants aren't a common option, but you should explore them in case they could be possibly available to you. So going more into venture capital. As I mentioned, venture capital is a form of investment that chases risk. And the way that venture capital makes money, these are investors, is that they get ownership in the company in exchange for the money they provide. So an investor's entire investment strategy is to invest in the company early when it has less value, take an ownership percentage, and then allow the company to grow and develop and increase in value. and then sell their ownership down the line at an increased price. This is an ownership in the company that the investors take, which means that they have property rights. So venture capital comes with a lot of obligations, which means that the investor is now an owner in your company. They now have a say in how the company is run and managed. It's not free money. You eventually pay the investor back if your company ends up being successful in the money that they make from selling off their ownership. So it's not free capital. No money is free. There are two major sources of venture capital. There are tons of formats and structures for venture capital, but they really all come from two sources. The first is funds, and the second are angels. Funds are investment institutions or investment businesses that take money from other people and then reinvest it into technology companies or startups. These are people who make a living investing other people's money. Angels tend to invest their own money. So they might be wealthy individuals. More and more frequently, you see a lot of people who aren't wealthy but make a good income investing a couple of $1,000s a year or every few months into startups. But these are people who are investing their own money. Perhaps it's to make a return, perhaps it's to support a particular industry, or perhaps they just have fun making their investments. The takeaway here, though, is that funds have more obligations because they have investors. They have to perform in certain ways in order to keep their investors happy. And one of the things that they have to do in order to keep their investors happy is to manage the risk that they take on when making investments. Funds cannot take on too much risk, even though they're seeking a risky asset when trying to invest in technology companies or startups. They have to be careful and structured in the amount of risk they take on. They also have obligations around providing returns to their investors and reporting obligations. So how this matters to you is that if you're raising money from venture capital and you decide to go to funds, the expectations that the funds are going to have for you are going to be a lot more specific, and they're going to be a lot more quantified and a lot more strict. So usually funds will only invest when you've gotten to a certain stage in development, and they're going to have a lot of requirements around how their investment is made. Angels, on the other hand, have no obligations to anyone other than themselves. They're investing their own money. And because it's their own money, they can do whatever they want. They can take the risk they want. They can invest in you just because they like you. They can invest in you because they believe in the mission of your product, even if they don't necessarily think it's going to be a success. So angels tend to be a good source of capital earlier on, where venture capital funds won't take the risk if they like what you're doing and if they have some sort of reason to invest. Angels could also be investing for a financial return, but the reasons they invest are a lot more various. A challenge with raising money from investors is that they tend to invest less money. Again, it's personal capital, and therefore their investments tend to be smaller. So you can't raise tens of millions of dollars from angels. You can, it's very difficult. So usually you're going to be raising from angel investors when you're early in the development of your company and you're looking for that initial capital to get started.